Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Kyle, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. Excited to hear your story, to share your story. Where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
I'm actually right next to Dallas. I'm in Irving, Texas right now.
Awesome. So, we just chatted about introducing a new kind of question to the show at the beginning of the show, which is, especially in your case, right, very relevant, which is awesome, which is, if your kids are interested in the military, what do you tell them?
If my kids are interested, I've got a daughter and then two sons. My daughter's not necessarily into it. I don't think that would be something that she would probably pursue, although she is looking into nursing. So it's possible. I've dropped some hints to her, but I'm certainly not pushing it really with any of them. But my oldest son, he is seriously considering it. In fact, he's been curious about going to the Naval Academy, or quite honestly, any of the academies. He's got the intelligence to do it. So that would be something that I would certainly not necessarily push on him, but would encourage him to do. And then my youngest son is the baby of the group. I don't know if it's something that he would necessarily go for, but I wouldn't be surprised either way. So I would encourage any of them to join.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. That's good to hear. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess I'll be curious to hear an update later on if, for example, your oldest son joins, and then if that encourages your other kids to kind of follow suit.
Sure. He's in 8th grade, so he's got about 4 years to decide, but we'll see.
Awesome. All right. So we'll start off with your formal introduction. Kyle Potts served for 6 years of active and reserve duty in the Army as a combat engineer, construction engineer, and topographic surveyor. Kyle completed his service as a corporal team leader. After service, Kyle quickly landed in the construction industry, first working for a large construction firm as a project superintendent for 13 years. Kyle rooted himself in the Dallas area, where he worked on large commercial projects, including high rises and airport work. In 2023, Kyle joined Skanska USA Building in North Texas as a General Superintendent, where he manages high-profile projects. I'm excited to hear about projects you're working on. I know that those high-profile ones are really cool. So excited to get to that part of the.
They can be stressful, but they're certainly an enjoyment of mine.
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. But before we get there, let's start off with childhood, where you grew up and what in childhood kind of led you to service.
Sure. I mean, you want me to start from the very beginning?
Very beginnings, yeah.
Okay. I was born and raised in Central Ohio, a town called Marysville. I laugh and tell people, I say, well, when you picture stereotypical Midwest USA, you're probably picturing my hometown. So, not necessarily a small town, but a small town feel. And we were only about 30 miles outside of Columbus, Ohio, where obviously most people recognize. I grew up there. Actually, my whole childhood, same house up till about age 12. Unfortunately, my parents separated at that time, and then my mom got remarried, but continued to live in the same town. As far as the military is concerned, my upbringing was probably as American apple pie as you can possibly get. Both my grandparents, both my grandfathers rather, served in World War II. My dad was a Vietnam vet. My uncle was a Vietnam vet. And my stepfather, who my mom obviously got remarried after they got divorced, he was actually in the Coast Guard. So every male influence that I had in my life had some type of service for the United States. We would go to every Memorial Day, every Veterans Day event. I can't tell you how many times I went to the VFW. Both in Marysville, where I grew up, and then at a neighboring town that my grandparents were in. So it was very much instilled in me throughout my childhood. as far as what instilled me or what motivated me to get into the military, I guess it's a two-pronged approach. It was kind of one of those. Obviously, I've got pride in America, and certainly had the lineage going through it. Everyone that had served, I don't recall them really saying anything bad about the service. It was always positive. I mean, there was things, comments, cliches that people would say, there's the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. And, and Uncle Sam was, I'm sure you could come up with a bunch of different jokes that people have said. But, quite honestly, my outlook on people who serve was always positive. So I think it helped motivate me to look towards that as a possible career opportunity. And then some of the things that they were offering, especially with continuing education, paying for school, certainly the training that you would receive, the discipline that I probably needed, or I know I needed as a teenager growing up, were all things that weighed into my decision.
So, were you able to recognize, if you remember, kind of when you were in high school, oh, if I go this route, it'll give me professional opportunity?
As a teenager,
Right. Yeah.
probably not. I mean,
Right.
I think that my parents had always instilled that that having the military experience or the military service on a resume, they always felt like that was a huge positive. That would set me apart from my peers as I got later into life, and quite honestly, it's come to fruition because there's only a few of us as far as a percentage goes in the industry. So it has helped me there.
Yeah. I think it's probably more, I don't know, obvious to kids nowadays, right? That, military service will provide at least, education for, later on your career kind of opportunities.
Adam, you still there?
Yeah. So with you, I think the internet got a little choppy for a moment. What I was saying
No
was,
worries.
yes, what I was saying was, I think responding to what you just mentioned in terms of, uh, perceiving military as like opportunity for later profession. I was saying I think today it's a little bit more obvious for kids. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that's something that helps kids. I think that it's something that would certainly help develop them in the aspect of having the diligence, having the wherewithal, and certainly just the work ethic that the military provides.
Yeah. So before we move on, another question that kind of always fascinates me with people, especially veterans, right, that have family who served in World War II and also in Vietnam. Did your grandparents or did your dad ever talk to you about their service?
My father's dad, so my paternal grandfather, he actually died when I was 3. So I have one vision of him, and so that was it. I don't recall anything as far as what he would say. I know this is obviously hearsay, but Dad, my father, said that they didn't really talk very much. That was a
Right.
common theme, I believe, for that generation, and so they never really said much. My mom's father, he would occasionally say things, but he died also when I was about 12. So I was kind of coming into my own. So I don't know if necessarily you would want to start telling war stories to a 9-year-old, but at the same time, I think they still had that same mentality that they had put it away and that they didn't really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Dad, my father, he talked about it quite a bit. He would tell quite a few stories. I don't know if I want to mention them here, but he would talk about it more often. And then, of course, that era, unfortunately, they came home to a country that didn't really want them.
Yeah.
It was a very tumultuous time, and obviously, I'm not old enough to live through that, but so I'm going off of what people told me. But he talks about some of the stories of coming back, and it really makes you sad to think that that's the that's the reception that those, mainly guys, but certainly there were women involved too. But, that's the reception that those guys received. And so there was a little bit of heartbreak that he would talk about, especially coming back to the United States, and just wasn't, didn't put a good taste in his mouth like you would expect.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's always fascinating to hear kind of, perspectives of older generations. And like you said about
Yeah.
your grandparents, I mean, granted you were younger, but just from what you've heard anyways, I mean, they just didn't talk about anything at all, which is,
No.
it's pretty wild to think about. So what was the kind of moment that you enlisted? I believe, you had mentioned it was during high school, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I'd actually joined when I was 17 years old. So
Mhm.
I did a thing called the split op. So you join as a junior in high school, and then between your junior and senior year of high school, then you complete your basic training. So I finished my junior year. I think it was a Friday. Whatever day of the week it was, and then that following, I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday, I found myself at 17 years old for Uncle Sam at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Kyle, we're back.
Yeah, it
It'll
seems to keep
keep,
going. Yeah, it
yeah,
keeps
it did
going in
go
and
in
out.
and
So
out. Yeah, it did. I'm sorry about that, but I caught you though.
no problem.
You were saying, 17, you're at Fort Leonard Wood.
Yes, I was. Middle of June in 1994, I was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for, I guess, 8 weeks of training, but then a week of in processing.
Mhm. And how is that when you're going in at 17, you go through basic, right? And then you get back to high school for a year essentially? Is that how that works?
Yeah, it was unusual. So I played football. I guess like half the boys in Ohio. So I got back. Let's see, it had been about mid-August. So football had started. Football camp and two-a-days I think had already started, and so I graduated probably about a Wednesday or Thursday. Got in the truck and then drove the, I don't know, 8 hours from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri back to Ohio, and then got up that next day and went to football practice for my senior year. It was interesting. I still have I still have about 4 or 5 guys that I still text and talk to from that group. But yeah, I remember showing up, and of course, you leave a boy and you come back a man, is what some people say. But so I showed up, and in typical military fashion, I'm the first one there. I mean, I'm eager to see everyone and get to practice. But then two, I've been waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning for
Yeah.
the past 2 months and running 5 miles. It didn't, that wasn't a big deal to me. But what was even better was when I was just sitting on the curb waiting for everyone to start showing up, and the coaches show up, and they don't even recognize me. And they're like, "Oh, so you want to go out for football?" And I'm like, "Coach, it's me, it's Kyle." And they're like, "Holy cow, what a change!" And so it was interesting. It was fun from that aspect. I do remember so we went through practice, and that really didn't hit me. I mean, it was basically a continuation of the Army as far as workouts and that. But I can remember the night before I went to high school and having to be like, I can't believe I'm going to go back to high school tomorrow. I mean, it was like, I had grown up and a relatively short amount of time, and then it
Mhm.
was just like, I can't believe I'm going back to this. So and we had been warned about that. We had been told that that's probably one of the most difficult things, and it ultimately was. It was
Sure.
difficult to go back to raising your hand, and here's where you're going to eat, and that type of stuff. It was fun, yet also a little difficult to transition to.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess at what point, I mean, when you enlisted originally, did you know you wanted to go into the engineering route, or was that later on?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I've always liked being outside. I always figured that I would do something outside, and I'd always lean towards construction. I always liked working with my hands. I always, just like that atmosphere. I did not like the idea of it being in an office the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess you get to 18, right? You finish high school. What happens next?
So I go back. I go back. Similar scenario. It's basically deja vu all over again. I graduate. Other than obviously I graduate. So I graduate high school on probably a Saturday, and then that following Wednesday or Thursday finds me back at Fort Leonard Wood to finish out my time there. So go through training there, and then finish up my service, and then come back to Ohio. I like to tell people now, I was, I obviously served in the mid to late 90s, where basically nothing happened. It was a different world, we'll say. We had just gotten out of Desert Storm a few years earlier. Quite honestly, there was only a couple skirmishes that the U.S. was involved with. We had been notified that we may get called up, or there were some things happening. Saddam was always on the radar. There was always a concern about him, but we had obviously fought them a few years earlier in Desert Storm, so he really wasn't much of a threat to us, although we were keeping an eye on him. And then came back to Ohio and did my reserve service. All the way up to the year 2000, when I started in the construction industry. Incidentally, so maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but when you sign up, it was a 8-year commitment, and so the last 2 years of my commitment was what they called inactive reserve, and so you do the math. It's September of 2001. I've still got another 6 months on my contract, and I'm really not doing anything. I mean, I am working. I'm basically a civilian, other than on paper. I've got this thing called inactive reserve, and of course, we had the attacks of 9/11, and it was shaking. I mean, it was like, if I had to go back, I would. Or I'd have to, but and there was that feeling of pride and being like, they did this to us, and so we want to, we need to defend ourselves, and so the American pride and all of that stuff was huge, and I know people were enlisting left and right, and certainly go to serve their country, but fortunately, as my wife says, they never called. I think we got enough people enlisted, and it was a huge influx of soldiers and sailors and Marines, and I never had to go back. I did enlist, so my ETS date, so my date when I'm completed with my service was I actually enlisted on Valentine's Day of '94. So February 13th was my last day, I guess, as an American soldier on paper, and so that was my wife's, or I guess my girlfriend at the time, her Valentine's Day gift. She was pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's wild timing, but
Yeah.
before we get to kind of that period, I want to just expand on service a little bit.
Sure.
Walk us through, what getting into your unit was like, first of all, how that training was, and if there's any kind of things that stand out in memory.
Well, a lot of the guys were war vets from Desert Storm. So oftentimes they would have their patch. So when you get to your unit, you get your unit patch on your left shoulder, and then of course, if you go to war, they then get one on the right shoulder. Well, of course, I never had one on my right shoulder because I was in 8th grade when Desert Storm was happening, and so I'd always get hazed, or I don't know if they call it hazing, but just kind of harassed by the older guys, that I didn't have my patch on my one shoulder, but those guys were great. I still talk to quite a few of them, but you're young, you're 17, 18 years old. you're bound to get a little bit of some harassment from the guys. But it was again a growth opportunity for me. I had people who looked out for me. I had a great group of guys that I served with, and they really kind of took me in and helped teach me, not just about my job, but about life in general, and just kind of helping you grow up.
Mm-hmm. So, like generally speaking, through service, anything like memorable stand out, even if it was, I don't know, any action that you took or any specific thing that you learned, whatever it may be.
Sure. There's a couple things. I mean, we would do training exercises, obviously, and I actually I probably saw more action in training exercises than some people did, in Desert Storm. But we had a guy. This one I used for my safety trainings for sometimes. We had a guy, and I don't know if you know it, but oftentimes they'll have these things called artillery simulators. And it sounds like a whistling sound. You'll hear them like on movies and that, and it looks like a grenade. And so you'll pull the pin, and then they'll throw it, and it sounds like artillery's coming in. Oftentimes that's usually how they'll wake you up with gunfire, and that those going off left and right. Well, we were actually out in training for it's at least a week. So it starts to become just white noise to you. Oh, here's gunfire. Here's artillery simulations coming in. And I remember this one time, and it was getting, I think, dusk. It was after chow. It was after 6-7 o'clock at night, and we had a guy, one of our instructors, and they would get a little leery, or not leery, but they wouldn't take the safety protocols. They'll say that perhaps you should. And the guy pulled the pin in the artillery simulator and just held it in his hand when he flipped the spoon off. And luckily for him, he pulled his hand away from his chest, and when he did that, it went off. Wow. There was no whistle, there was no sound. It was just just a large explosion. And I was probably, I'm going to say 100 yards from him. And I can remember it was like, man, what was weird? It was a different sound that, it was unusual. And all of a sudden I hear somebody screaming, and I go running over there and see the aftermath. He was still alive, but what was neat, or what was really cool, was to see all those trainees, myself included, taking the training that we had done, for months, and implement it, right there, and literally save a guy's life. I mean, it was truly a sense of pride, and like, wow, look, we did this. And the guy, one of the instructors, I mean, they're not necessarily your friend, during training, but he thanked us repeatedly, for obviously for saving his life. But that was something that really stuck out to me, that we knew what we needed to do. We executed it, and we did it in a professional manner, and saved a man's life. So that was one thing that really sticks out to me, when you think about some of those guys that you were with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can see why that would stick out. Going through your service, I mean, it sounds like you did a lot of things that are very relatable to what you do today.
Sure.
What was, training for, those skills in service like?
It was somewhat similar yet different. I was trying to remember some of the things that I had gone through, and one that was sometimes some people laugh about it. So we had a class. It was the construction engineering certification that we had to go through. It was a difficult class. It was essentially engineering and learning about the different construction types, and different methods, and how a lot of it had to do with estimating, and how many people we need for a certain operation. What do we need to do when we come under fire? Different scenarios, and you'd have to do this. Well, the one thing that people relate to, especially in this industry, and then to the military, they talk about batch plants, like concrete batch plants.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, or sometimes on larger projects, we'll put them on site just because it makes sense, rather than, ordering 1,000 yards a day from a batch plant, 10 miles away. We're just going to put it here, and then we'll just dump it in the not pickup trucks, but tandems, and then, dump them off, and then it makes our cycle time faster and that. Well, in the class, one of the things that we had to learn was how many parachutes do you have to put on these different pieces of equipment when you have to deploy them? Because, if you go to Iraq or Iran or some of these places in the middle of the desert, they don't really have roads or concrete plants that are, within a driving distance. And so we'd have to airdrop them off of C-130s, out the back of C-130s. And so you'd have to calculate, if you have, this type of batch plant, or if you're using this type of equipment, or you got a dozer, or you got, obviously Humvees, or other pieces of equipment, how do you pack that? How do you deploy that? And how do you make sure that it hits the mark? And, the things you see on TV, it's like, it doesn't just happen. I mean, it's somebody has to sit there and figure out, okay, if I'm this high and I'm going at this rate and I'm going to drop this weight, what needs to go first, and how many chutes do I have to have on it, and how does it get deployed? And it was tough. It was a very, very difficult course. But sometimes if people ask me, what did you learn from the military that you use today, and I said, well, I've never had to do a airdrop of a concrete batch plant, but if you need it, I'm your guy. Sometimes that gets a laugh.
That's a good one. It'd be a good way to find yourself in a niche position right now in civilian life.
Right.
Were you also responsible for in that capacity, like figuring out, I guess, when to drop to land in a certain area, or is that like an air crew? Is that someone else?
Well, normally you have your officers who are also involved, but they'll look at you and go, okay, Potts, I need you to calculate where we need to drop, when we need to drop, what elevation. You've got different parameters that you have to take into account. I mean, it's not like you just fly at 30,000 feet and just hope for the best. I mean, if you're going, I'm trying to go under radar or trying to do things to in a war type scenario, how do you calculate that, and how do you make sure that you're obviously successful in it?
Yeah, that's cool. I guess I was trying to understand if you were like taking ownership from packing it to wherever it lands. So
yeah. I mean, you have packers. I mean, you have guys. That's all they do. But my job was to make sure that, okay, where do we hook it up? How many do you need? That type of stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting to realize that that's a skill set, and people really got to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you see it on TV, and I don't think they've ever videotaped it or videotaped. Wow, listen to my age. I don't know if they've recorded, dropping a concrete batch plant into there, but you always see like tanks and Humvees and things like that being pushed out of a C-130 or some other piece of flying equipment, and it's usually fun to watch.
Right, and I mean, I guess all of the bases that got set up, that got built in GWAT, that's all from dropping materials in, correct?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, like I said, there's no roads there, and so they end up having to do it that way, or else, there's a few other ways for you to be able to get in and out of there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of going through your service, did anything in particular happen, or schools that you attended, something that like kind of resulted in your end rank, or was it simply a factor of time?
A little bit of both. There was a point system, everything from how you scored on your PT to inspections to I'm trying to remember all of it, but you would always be scored, and everything from continuing education courses to schools to, again, your PT test. You would get scored, and then they would come to you and be like, there's a slot open, especially for the corporal rank. I had to transfer units, and I gladly did. There was a team leader position, and they said, you're one of the top specialists here, and we think that you would be good at it, and so I took the jump.
That's awesome. What I like to highlight, and I only recently realized that there should be a necessity to highlight this, is when you become a team leader. I mean, talk to us about like what that means in terms of responsibilities.
Sure. Yeah. So everybody typically knows there's a platoon, and there's usually 3 or 4 platoons to a company. But inside of a platoon, then you have a squad, and then you have a squad leader, and then below them you have your team leaders. You typically had 2 team leaders with each squad, and so I was obviously one of those. And so I was in the last year. There's about a year left on my contract, and so I took the role. I did not go to what they call it, at least at the time, PLDC, in order for me to become a sergeant. So I was essentially serving in a sergeant role, but I never got the rank because I never went to PLDC because they asked for me to extend, and I was waffling about it. I was trying to decide what to do, but I decided I had served my country and did my time, and was like, you know what, I've appreciated it, but I think that I'm going to move on.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you could expand on like what were responsibilities in that role?
Yeah. So I was in charge of 3 to 4 guys, depending on the time of the year. I had 4 when I got there, and then dropped to 3, and then actually went back up to 4. But us 4, we would typically do any type of construction activities or different explosive training sessions, things like that. So oftentimes I would get the guys together, and you'd have everyone from specialist down to a private, and just do some retraining, making sure that the newer guys, especially, I found when they came back from their training sessions, that they obviously had the most up-to-date training, and they would teach us some things that they had learned. For instance was like when I joined, we used what they called time fuse and det cord, which most explosives were used using that system. But then at the latter part of my career, they started using, I believe it was called shock cord. It was a little bit different, and so kind of like an old dog with new tricks. Of course, I was only 22 at the time, but it was just difficult for me to necessarily grasp. I mean, I was able to get it, but it was a good scenario where the young guys are teaching the older guys or the more seasoned vets. Here's what we're doing in this. We're doing now for the Army.
Yeah. So, I mean, exactly to kind of that point in the end, it's you were only 22, yet you were, leading a team 3 or 4, doing things that, require, leadership, right? Because, I mean, it's not necessarily always safe, right? I mean, those construction projects you're doing, all right, that's fine. But if you're doing any kind of demo work, that's obviously a dangerous scenario to be managing. And so it's really neat to kind of highlight the opportunity at a young age to lead a team, and as we'll carry on in your story and how that kind of translates into your day-to-day life now in civilian profession.
Sure.
Awesome. So you're finishing up with service. Well, I guess you finished first, and then you had that gap of reserve duty. Is that correct?
Yes.
Active.
Okay. So did the reserve, and then rolled into I got hired on by a large general contractor actually a month before my ETS date. So I was able to work it out to where I was working in 2000 as soon as we hit the new millennia. Started working with a large general contractor.
So that's kind of what I was trying to expand on, which is you were on I guess active reserve, and then when September 11th happened.
Right. I'd finished up with reserves.
Okay.
And then I had a job in January 1st of 2000. I was working at that job until 2001 when 9/11 happened. So I was on what they called inactive reserve when 9/11 occurred.
Okay, yeah. I was trying to gather kind of the timeline there. So going back a little bit to exactly when you finish active duty, now you're transitioning into civilian life, or I guess half civilian life, right? Because you're still on reserve duty there. Sure. Talk to us a little bit about what that transition was like for you.
It was a little bit difficult. I think that I came from a very structured environment. With the Army, it was here's when you wake up, here's when you go work out, here's when you eat, here's when we're going to be that next day. We're eating lunch here, and it was very, very structured, very intense. certainly a little different than what most civilian life is like. But I enjoyed it, but it was again just a little different. So when you go from that to civilian life, it was a change. I think at that time, there wasn't the whole. Or at least I didn't feel like there was the whole, thank you for your service, thank you for your service, and maybe because there wasn't really a war going on, it was a little bit of a different time there, but it just nobody really said much to me, but it was just more or less, I did my time, and now I've got to try to roll back into the civilian life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what I like to kind of expand on that front is now that you have, the knowledge that you do today, of course, what advice would you give your younger self? In other words, other veterans that are listening in that transition period.
In the transition period,
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest you take it serious. When you're doing your out processing, when you're going through and you're trying to figure out what you want to do when you grow up, and what you want to do for your civilian career, or for your civilian job. When they're sitting down and they're talking to you and they're describing, here are some things that you would be good at, or here's what your training translates to in the civilian world. Take it serious. Take it and go, you know what? Yeah, this is something that I enjoyed doing on for the military. This may be something that I want to do on the outside. So when you're going through that transition phase, typically most people are excited. They're like, oh, I'm finally done. I've done my service and that. But looking back, if I could tell myself something, to the 20-something-year-old Kyle, I would say, listen to what they tell you. It finally resonated with me, after I got out, but it would have been to ask a few more questions about what my possibilities were, and then to make sure that whatever training I had done to that time period, that it would help me in the civilian life.
Yeah, that's great advice. Did that process kind of guide you to the construction industry, or
Oh
you
yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
okay, awesome.
No. I mean,
yeah.
it was something that, in fact, I remember when I was going through it. One of the things was construction worker or engineer, and obviously being in the Corps of Engineers, that may be a little bit obvious, but that was something that when you're looking at what have I done, what training do I have, and then what do I want to do moving forward, that was certainly something that helped provoke me to go into this industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what happened in terms of I guess talk to us about, how you found your job that you started with, shifting back into civilian life.
Yeah. So I was, finishing up and trying to decide, where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. I was finishing up school, and then certainly the Army, and I was looking at different options. I had an opportunity with some different grad schools. I actually went out to University of Southern California. I was looking to go there. I was in the Midwest, and was just like, maybe I want some sun and surf. I'm not sure, but I looked at that option, and then I had the opportunity. They had made a proposal to me to come on work on site full time, and so I went ahead and took that. I figured, this is an industry that values experience, and so I should probably get some of that before I go back to school.
Yeah, I mean that's some good advice too, right there. How did you get noticed by that company? I mean, were you actively applying? How did that happen?
I was actually interning with them. I
Okay,
was
awesome.
interning with them, and so I was there part time, and then doing the Army thing, and so immediately after graduation, they made me an offer, and came on full time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually want to highlight that as a general means of getting involved in the construction industry is find that internship, that shadowing kind of an opportunity, which, just basically show up and it'll likely be that you'll end up finding yourself, in a role.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you start showing, you show up and you perform and you
Hmm.
start to show that you're an asset, then you get noticed quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a great opportunity, especially for vets, right, that are looking for a career to get into. It's a great way to get involved and then find yourself in a job. Um,
Absolutely.
that said, I think we might, I want to see if we missed like a part in your life story, which is, were you in school, meaning undergrad, while you're in service or in
Yes,
between?
yes. So I
Okay.
was going to school and going to for the Army.
Okay. Was that reserve duty, I'm guessing?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
awesome. What was that like in terms of being in school after active duty and then also while being on reserve?
It was fairly easy. It worked well. It wasn't much of an issue.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, awesome, great. So let's continuing on with your life story here. So
Sure.
you started that role. When does that September 11th situation happen?
So I was in the latter part of the first project that I was on.
Wow.
We were going along. I was a field engineer and was basically doing my job and loving it. And I can recall, I mean, like most people, where I was and when I got the news, and then I just remember, calling my girlfriend and calling family members and that, calling my unit and then saying, what do we know? We don't know anything at this time. And of course, it was just a lot of disarray. It was a lot
Hmm.
of just, what's going on here. And, when I got back, then it was, back to my apartment. I'm like, man, what's going to happen here?
Right.
It was a tumultuous time.
Yeah. Especially with your status. I mean, that's a
Oh
wild
yeah. Oh
position.
yeah.
You're basically sitting in no man's land, not knowing what's going to happen next. That's pretty
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it was
yeah.
unique. I certainly had a vested interest. I mean, there
Hmm.
was again just that feeling of we were obviously attacked, and so we were mad. We were okay. What are we going to do now to defend ourselves? We've got to retaliate, or we've got to respond accordingly. And so people were going, what should we be doing? I just know for myself it was interesting because I had literally turned in all my gear, had turned in all
Hmm.
my stuff, and it was just kind of that mentality of, okay, am I going to be on a plane back to Leonard Wood and then overseas, or what am I doing? So it was a tumultuous time for those
Sure.
6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you get to the end of that 6 months. That concludes your military career. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Was
I
there?
finished that, and then I was actually there in the Midwest, and well, actually, I was with that same business
Mhm.
unit for another 3 years.
Mhm. Was there any kind of, I don't know, asked about transition from active to civilian. Was there any kind of additional transition from, okay, now I've actually, literally concluded my service, um, from that point, or you kind of moved
Uh,
moved on from it already?
Yeah, not really. I mean,
Yeah.
you're already pretty well ingrained
Hmm.
into the civilian world. You just, some people laugh and they say, you play Army on the weekends and that. So yeah, there is some truth there, and you try
Right.
to balance that back and forth. But no, I mean, I got my papers, my discharge papers, and they shook my hand. But at that point, I think the transition phase had already been completed.
Hmm. Also, obviously, with the kind of hindsight knowledge that you have now, do you think it was helpful having reserve duty? So basically, like weekends here and there to kind of phase into civilian life,
I
or
think so. I think
okay,
so.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I think it helped. You were still serving, but yet at the same time, you still had a
yeah,
job and were doing that. So it may be, I guess you want to call it like a halfway house, or somewhere where it's like you're still involved, but you're re-engaging with the civilian
yeah,
side. So it was helpful to in that transition.
yeah, yeah. It seems like it would be cool. So finish with your service. What are kind of some projects that come up that I don't know, are highlights of your career. I feel like you have a lot of really,
Oh
really
yeah.
cool ones under your belt.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. So yeah, I moved to Dallas in '05. I had an opportunity. I was actually out of the Midwest and was traveling quite a bit. I
Mhm.
was in Louisville for a job there, and then I was traveling to Florida quite a bit. Miami, I was in Miami for a few months, and then I was in Palm Beach for a few months. So doing a lot of back and forth, getting some good airline miles. But I was trying to figure out, obviously I just got married and was trying to figure out where do I want to be. I didn't look very promising as far as the economy went there in Ohio and Michigan. So I was trying to decide what to do, and I had the opportunity. I had approached my operations manager and said, I'd like to go somewhere where I could live and work, and
Mhm.
I don't foresee that here. He was like, yeah, you probably, if you want to do that, you probably want to move, either to Florida or to Los Angeles, coincidentally, or Texas. And this was in '05, and I didn't really know much about Texas. Obviously I knew of it, and a little bit perhaps of the stereotypes of Texas, but I didn't really, see myself necessarily moving there. But the opportunity presented itself, and I'm like, I don't necessarily, I like Miami, but I don't know if this is a place I want to live. And then I actually had an aunt who lived in Orange County for a while, and I just didn't really care for the traffic very much. So I was like, well, why don't we try Texas? And so there was an opening here in Dallas, and so moved my wife and I here in '05. It was kind of funny because then as we're moving in, she had actually purchased the house through me, just doing videos. This was before FaceTime and all that stuff. And so what we did was, she would pick out some homes, during the day and say, hey, why don't you go visit, these homes and see what you think. And so I was working during the day, and then at night going with the realtor to look at homes, and then finally figured out the house that we wanted to live in, and so we bought it. So the first time she saw it was when she owned it. So it was that's a kind of a funny story. But then what's even better is as we're moving in, we're like standing in the foyer, and she's like, well, how long do you think we'll be here? And I said, oh, I don't know. I said maybe 3 years at tops, and then we'll be out of here. And that was 20 years ago. So it's been good to us. But yeah, I kind of got off track. But as far as projects go, I mean, it's been, I don't know if I could have imagined this, but I the first big project I worked on was one for Deloitte. Used to call it Deloitte and Touche. They built a big training facility just northwest of DFW Airport. That one was, I think, about $150 million at that time. So it's a very large job. And I realized that I like large projects. I like the teamwork atmosphere. It was almost kind of a military type of feel where you had multiple individuals with multiple different facets and responsibilities, and we had to function as a team. And so I started to kind of almost felt nostalgic of this is kind of cool. We're doing something truly amazing, and yet at the same time we've got different teams attacking this to make sure that it's successful. So I really enjoyed that. Got an opportunity with another company. We were doing a similar or almost another project of similar size, if not larger, for State Farm. It was just north of Dallas, and so that one was my first high rise that I worked on for those guys. From there, I mean, you guys read the news. I mean, how many different companies are moving to town? Toyota helped work on their project. It wasn't very tall, but it was certainly a large project. From there, I went to American Airlines. They redid their corporate headquarters, so I got to help redo that project or redo their corporate headquarters, and then a few others from there. I got to work on a couple high rises then in downtown Dallas. One is called the Victor, literally across the street from American Airlines Center. That's where we play hockey and basketball. So pretty well known area down there. And then the last one with that company was a job. It's called the High Sea Gates at Dallas Fort Worth Airport.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not very large. In fact, when I went out there, I was like, how much is this thing? And it was less than $100 million. And I'm like, okay. I mean, that's not necessarily small, but not exactly a high rise in downtown Dallas or a major corporate headquarters. But that project was probably the highlight of my career as far as awards and accolades and just the ingenuity that we had. Those that hadn't seen it, it's where we use the module system at the airport. And when they described to me what they wanted to do, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I was like, well, I've been around for a few years. We can try this. Let's give it a shot. And so what we did was we tore down a portion of the terminal, and then started putting in utilities, foundations, basically everything below your feet. So from, we'll say, the slab on grade down, we were doing that on site. And then off site about a mile, just outside the fence there at the airport, we were building these different modules made of steel. And so they were about 80 foot square. And then we had that going simultaneous. And then about, I guess, 8 months to a year into it, we picked them up one at a time, drove them across the runway, and then set them into place. It was crazy. I mean, it was one of those where, I didn't necessarily want to do it, but at the same time, in hindsight, it was like, wow, I was put here. Somebody must have thought that it was a good idea for me to come out here to do this, because it was on the news constantly, and we were very successful in that team. Again, just that military mindset. It was like everybody functioned like they should, and was certainly motivated to make something like that happen. So that was one of, if not the favorite project that I had completed at that time.
That's awesome. Was there like an extra obvious feeling, or just I don't know, operation kind of difficulty in working in an airport?
Oh yeah. It was funny because I actually had made the comment. I don't know if I told you this, but when I went out there, I was like, I feel like I'm back in the Army. I honestly feel like I'm back in the military. You had so many different entities and so many different stakeholders, and you're like, okay, who do I need to talk to about this, and and obviously I'm trying to learn it, so there was a little bit of a learning curve to go there. But you obviously have a government entity, and it's very large. It's one of the largest airports in the world, quite honestly, and so it kind of had that military type of feel to it. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's awesome. Taking a little bit of a step back to when you were traveling a lot for work.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what that was like, generally speaking? Because from my perspective, anytime I hear or talk to anyone who does traveling for construction, I just think that must be really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I was, I guess, lucky. I mean, I was young. I was in my mid, early to I guess mid 20s. So I'd gotten married, no kids. So I was just traveling back and forth. In fact, sometimes my girlfriend or my wife would fly to the spots that I was at to take a mini vacation. But yeah, I mean, it was cool, in my 20s to everything from seeing different areas, especially in Miami, to just learning how the system works. How does a frequent flyer system work? How do you do this? I didn't know, and it was just trial and error and trying to understand how do I sign up for these different things. And then quite honestly, there can be barriers in just culture barriers in the United States themselves. I mean, you go from Detroit, Michigan, down to Miami, Florida. There's a little bit of a difference there in the work culture and certainly the language barrier and just things that you had to learn. it's different all over the country. I mean, yes, you can swing a hammer probably the same way in most everywhere in the country, but at the same time, there's different nuances that you've got to learn. The way that we may operate in Dallas may not work in a place like Chicago. Where unions are a huge influence. Good or bad. I think that some of the best workers I've run into, are union labor. My father was a union worker, my grandfather, my father-in-law, but it's a different management style, I guess, and then also different tactics and things that you have to keep in mind when you're traveling to different parts of the country.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of I'll call it hindsight advice for anyone listening who's engaged in traveling for construction, which is cultural differences.
Yeah.
I don't know that someone would think of that on their own without experiencing it. So that's really cool to hear you
I
say
got
that.
to learn. I got to learn a lot. I mean, I tell people, these different spots that I go to. Well, if you want a cafe con leche in Miami, I'll tell you where to go there. If you want the best barbecue in Texas, I'll tell you where to go there. If you want the best fried food in Louisville, I can probably point you in the right direction. So it was fun to get to experience that be able to be exposed to those different cultures.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds awesome. So what are some projects that you're proud of that you're working on nowadays?
Yeah. Now, so in my current role, I was going to get to that. So I'm the General Superintendent with Skanska here in North Texas. They reached out to me about a year and a half ago and said, they obviously saw my resume and were like, we'd like to talk to you. We think that this would be something that you're pretty good at. I honestly had thought that I was going to basically be in the field for the rest of my career. I loved what I did, and I still love what I do. But that was something that always just motivated me, was seeing the work in place and things like that. And they, so Skanska reached out to me, and there was a position that's somewhat unique from other firms, but it's again the general superintendent role, where I like to say that if you see actual work going on, then I'm in charge of it. So anything that's actually being put into place, then I'm in charge of it. So I've got a superintendent crew here doing work from just north of Fort Worth all the way out to Tyler, Texas. So Tyler's our largest project, just over $200 million. We've got a hospital going on over there. And then at Tarrant, so on the other side of the Metroplex, we've got a $150 million school. Actually, the sum total of all the projects was $300 million, but the first portion was completed before I arrived. But yeah, so those are our two main ones that we've got going. And so we're finishing up the first part of the one there in Fort Worth. We're coming out of the ground and we're enclosing the second portion over there. In Tyler, we're starting to enclose that building and look into how we're going to be turning that over. And then at the same time, we've got projects kicking off. We've got 4 different projects for Collin County, a couple of buildings, one of which they're going to be starting anew here later next year. And then 2 we've got under contract. One's or both of them rather are renovations that's going to do a significant redo for 2 different buildings. And then simultaneously, we've got one literally coming out of the ground now in Denton that is going extremely well. I know it's in the first parts of it, but clients happy. In fact, most all of our clients are a joy to work with, and certainly appear happy and pleased with the results of our efforts. And so it's been unique. I am basically in charge of who I used to be. So there is a little bit of some learning curve there, as far as I'm no longer dealing with the day-to-day operations necessarily, but if there's an issue, I'm usually the one who's having to handle that, and then I'm having to deal with it at different projects. So it's been definitely a growth opportunity, and one that I'm in hindsight has been a good move for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Lots of projects.
Oh, yes.
Awesome to see that kind of trajectory of growth. What kind of advice would you give for someone who, sees your career and wants to kind of track in that same kind of a way?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, construction's so unique in that no two careers I don't think are the same. I think in my formidable years, or when I was first starting out, you would take the sheet that showed, okay, well, this is what I need to do in order for me to get to the next level, and you would try to check those off, and you would try to, okay, well, I need a job this size. Well, I better go find the job this size, and so it's not necessarily in stone of here's how to be successful in this. I think that oftentimes it's certainly your personality and your diligence, and how you attack things, and how you make sure that work gets completed, and certainly successful, and then in a professional manner. If you're looking for advice, I don't know if you could possibly mirror my career, but I would suggest, at a minimum, make sure that you get some field experience. Get out there with the guys and the ladies that are putting the work in place. You know, it's sometimes not fun. I enjoyed it because I like being outside and seeing the fruits of our labor. But I would say, take the time to make sure that you get some field experience. How does this go together? How do you coordinate this? What happens when the concrete doesn't show up? Things that they don't really teach you in school, that you have to learn quickly, and you have to adapt, and you have to make sure that you keep the team moving forward. So make sure that you do at least some stint in the field in some capacity. I was also involved with a few roles where I was the project engineer and project manager. I found out it was fine. I found out that was not my passion. My passion was more in the field, and being a superintendent, and working my way up through the ranks that way.
Yeah, yeah, that great advice, and I can totally understand kind of your perspective there. So closing out the kind of professional part of the show, of the conversation, what are some translatable skills from military to civilian profession?
Oh, I mean, as far as construction goes, there's numerous. I mean, it's very, very similar. It almost mirrors one another, especially with just the demeanor and just the mentality that you've got to have. I don't push paper necessarily for a living, so I don't necessarily know how to translate that. But what I can say is, things happen. Uh, Things happen in life. Things don't go according to plan. You have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So if again, the concrete isn't showing up, if materials don't arrive on time, if your labor is struggling, if things occur that you hadn't planned for, what are you going to do? And I think that skill was probably the most beneficial for me to learn from the military than anything else. It was, don't give up. You got to find a way to be successful one way or another. It's going to be tough sometimes, but make sure that you persevere and be successful in whatever the endeavor is that you're in.
Yeah, yeah, it's well said. It's great advice, also, right, for veterans who are looking for a career. And I
Absolutely.
also, yeah, I like how you highlighted before when you're talking about starting those, larger projects, when you went on that first one and you realized kind of the nature of, being in a large project, having all these different stakeholders involved, and how that kind of had a similar, atmosphere or culture to, your service, right, military, and just highlighting that in the sense it's I think as relatable as it can be, given military versus civilian life.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So closing out the show, last two questions. We'll start with wellness practice, whatever that means to you, what that looks like.
Are you talking about physically, mentally?
Yeah, any or all of the above. Yeah, it's open
Oh
ended.
gosh. I would say, especially as you're transitioning out, stay active. Stay physically fit. It obviously depends on your age. Obviously, I'm probably not going to go out and run a marathon anytime soon, but I try to stay active, and I've tried to adjust as I've gotten older. For the people in their 20s that are getting out of the military, just keep that same routine. It's not fun
Yeah.
necessarily to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and run, 2 to 5 miles. But at the same time, I think now looking back, now that I'm pushing 50, to say, yeah, I kept my body in shape, and I think it's helped me to stay healthy, as I continue to age. So make sure that you continue that same process. Looking at it from a mental aspect, I would say, continue your education. That's one of the things that helped motivate me. I've got 2 master's degrees, and it wasn't necessarily for the actual pieces of paper, but just the idea of, continue to work towards something, and then continue to work for something that helps you on a professional and just your personal level. So you don't want to get stuck in, okay, I graduated and now I'm just going to be doing the same job. And then I think some people, their mental capacity probably starts to decrease just because they're not doing new things. They're not continuing to grow their mind. And unfortunately, life happens. I get it. You don't have as much time or free time in your 40s and 50s as what perhaps you had in your 20s. So you got to adjust. I get that, but I would suggest you do some type of continuing education. Spiritually, I'm Catholic. I've been Catholic for, almost 20 years now, and I've continued to grow with that. I know that everyone has struggles with that, but I would suggest, certainly Catholicism, but look for some spiritual guidance. I think that helps a person become a whole person, and that they have something to strive towards. Continuing education, being the same vein. It's like something that I need to work on, and yet it makes me a better person too.
Yeah.
As far as your health, looking at diet, I always suggest to never eat anything that's prepackaged. I started that about 10 years ago. I know a lot of guys that's what they live off of, and I look at them now, especially after 10, 20 years, and I think there is something to that we need to be careful of. So I don't necessarily, like, if you put a bag of chips in front of me, I wouldn't eat it, but if I have a decision, I would usually go for the fresh fruits or things like that. So it may be just a small thing, but I would suggest that. And then the last thing, I think it's a difficult thing to talk about with especially with veterans. Let's be honest. Alcohol intake and, quite honestly, abuse is huge. We consume a lot of alcohol, certainly in the military, and I've seen a lot of guys, especially afterwards, who struggle with that. And I think you need to be cognizant of it. You need to be careful of it, certainly, but keep that in mind. I'm not saying to completely swear off any kind of alcohol, but at the same time, let's be careful, because I think that it's a downward spiral that guys need to be careful of, and if they're having issues, then reach out for help.
Yeah, that a really, really great answer. Very holistic, across the board answer. So I really appreciate that. It's great advice. Great advice. Last question is any book or books you'd like to recommend to the audience?
Oh gosh. The one that I recommend that really isn't very popular, or at least I don't see it written about very often, is called "Put the Moose on the Table." It's another way, I think, to say, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And in there's different stories, talking about how, one of them I remember was the whole Tylenol episode, I believe from the 80s, where they had the issue with cyanide, and people were dying from taking Tylenol. And the CEO at the time made the decision to just pull all the bottles and make sure that the health of America, and, quite honestly, all of their customers was intact. And it showed in hindsight, a great, it was almost a great marketing ploy for Tylenol to show, we truly do care. It's not just about our bottom line. It's about, our people, and certainly our customers. And there were different scenarios similar to that I like to read up on occasionally to just remind myself, that there's a reason why we make the decisions that we do. One that I also like is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey talks about time management, and he does this matrix, and it talks about urgent and non-urgent, important and not important, and how you should be living your life in the areas of certainly working on important items that aren't urgent. You don't want to be basically managing your life by crisis, where everything you deal with is, important and urgent. So that's a good book for people to read. I do like Stephen Covey, the How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah,
that's a good one, especially for people coming out of the military. When I first started working, they had actually sent me to that training session, the Dale Carnegie training, and so anybody that's coming out, I would highly suggest you take that training. We come from a world that's very rigid, and we'll say that the civilian world may not be that much. And so for us to be able to relate and try to get things done, it's a good practice and a good habit to get into, and realizing, okay, yeah, I'm not necessarily Mr. Likeable, but I do need to get my job done, and I can do it in a certain manner that isn't just, screaming at people or using other motivational tactics. A few others, I'm sure my Navy friends will make fun of me for this, but I do like No Easy Day. It was about the raid on Bin Laden, obviously taking him out, and then the Navy SEALs and the training that they go through. But there's a lot of similarities against any of those trainings that we go through, and so I really found that one to be a good page flipper. And then the last one I like. It's called Bo's Lasting Lessons. I'm a Michigan grad, so being Ohio State week, I've got to make sure I get something in there about that. But it was interesting. It's by John Bacon, and I don't know if you watch much as far as the Big Ten goes, but John's a big author on Michigan. He went there and has written a few books, but I think it was Bo Schembechler's last. Not necessarily autobiography, but one that he was interviewed for, and he offered up some leadership ideas and things that he had used. And I remember, it's probably on the first page, but it was like, some of these books you read about leadership are written by people who've never led anybody. And so it was like, okay, yeah, I kind of like this. So yeah, I would suggest those 5 come to mind that I think that are beneficial to most anyone.
Yeah, I know some of them great recommendations. I'm sure the others are awesome as well. What fascinates me is the Dale Carnegie one, how it's still relevant so many years later. I find that to be so crazy. Yeah, that was my thought process when I was reading it. It was just amazement that I guess it's timeless, evidently so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Kyle, really, really appreciate you jumping on, sharing your story. Seems like you've been having an awesome career. Excited to see where it keeps going from here. Thanks so much for joining the show, man.
Thank you.
Awesome. We'll see everyone soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.